Welcome to Career Practitioner Conversations. This podcast is presented by the National Career Development Association. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development, and I am here with Dr. Bret Anderson. Dr. Anderson is president of H2 Communication, LLC, which provides job readiness training, executive coaching, and frontline leadership development. Welcome back to NCDA's podcast, Bret.
Thank you, Melissa. It's glad to be back. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. In a previous episode, you and I talked about employer fit algorithms, some of the research you've done in that area, and how it all relates to corporate culture. So
Yes.
today we're going to take it a little bit further, and we're going to talk more about cultural leadership.
Okay.
A lot has happened, right? Particularly where diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are concerned since we last talked. So seeing that the relationship between employers and employees has gotten a little more tense, might even say adversarial. How did DEI initiatives promise to improve the situation?
Oh, that's a great point. Employers in the past, they really thought that taking care of their employees was the right thing to do. And then obviously, profits became more important. So DEI programs, what they promised to do was to bring about a workforce that was much more innovative, much more relatable to the customer base, depending on the company that the individual was joining, or the customer base that the product was associated with. And for the most part, DEI programs contributed to that because they've lended to higher financial goals and other types of stability issues associated with finances. So for the most part, DEI programs have done that. But of course, there's been a backlash. With any social movement, you have a backlash, right?
Yeah, these initiatives we're seeing are starting to maybe decline. Some companies, even campuses, are doing away with those offices and groups that they set up. So it seems like they're stalling as a corporate culture improvement initiative. So why do you think that that's happening?
Well, the biggest issue is just the backlash. I mean, you've got the Supreme Court that decided that affirmative action was no longer necessary for college recruitment. You have state legislatures who believe that they roll back certain programs that are associated with understanding the history of the United States, including slavery and Reconstruction and things like that. And so I think the backlash has been mainly related to just those types of things. And the media has put a big, emphasis on those types of things, of course, because that sells in the media. But based on some research that I've been doing and just my personal experience, DEI programs, they've gone quiet. They haven't necessarily gone silent. And so there's been many studies, but one of the more recent studies in 2023 says that it was based on 300 C-suite executives. They're saying that their organizations are expanding DEI or IED, whatever you want to call it, programs because they believe that it works for their organization and they're getting the metrics that kind of show that. So 57% of these C-suite executives in the US said that they had grown their diversity commitments over the past 12 months. Even as much as 59% reported opposition to diversity programs, but they still said, hey, no, we're going to continue to go with this, even though we get opposition internally. And then obviously you have the SCOTUS and the state legislature issues.
That's encouraging. And I would invite listeners to take a listen to a recent episode with our government relations committee. That really, I think, ties into how we all need to be aware of what's going on and how it does affect the workplace as far as laws are concerned. So thanks for tying that in there.
No worries. Yeah, and I'll just add one more piece of that. I think, there is a decline. About 6% of the companies are declining, but mainly that's due to legal issues, legal liability and other primary factors related to cost. Because either they didn't find that it works, but most importantly, they found that, look, it's not meeting with our legal requirements for human resources or talent resource organizations. So we'll talk about that later in this podcast. But I think that's more. I think that's something that we need to elevate and address because that is sort of an elephant in the room for DEI programs.
And that is an interesting take, and some insight there,
Hmm.
but which you don't really hear people talking about, like
That's
why.
right.
Yeah, there's a
That's
lot of
right.
assumption about why, but it's not necessarily the real reason why things are
You got
happening.
it. Hmm.
So let's switch gears just a little bit, Brett,
Hmm.
into another area of some controversy, which is
Hmm.
artificial intelligence, right? That's
Yes.
another hot topic we're hearing a lot about in the media. It's really in the
Yes.
workplace in lots of ways. So how has AI become part of recruitment efforts for many employers, and what benefit
Hmm.
do they have for using these kinds
Hmm.
of tools?
Wow. AI has been a part of recruitment and hiring and onboarding for, gosh, at least 20 plus years because we've used scanners and we've done things through Boolean operators or keyword or key search, word search engines. It's just taken a more prominent place today because it's just really hard to comply with the metrics that the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission or other regulation or compliance agencies want you to take. And so it's just easier if you have something more automated to help you do that. So AI has, but although, AI has played a big role, and I think it's playing an increasingly larger role because now you have things like Chat GPT or Gemini or these programs who they can mimic, right? An actual person's character through words and through descriptors and adjectives that can be placed on resumes. And if you're good enough, and if you're smart enough, and if you're your Boolean operator or the resume scanner that you're using is is highly sophisticated, oftentimes it's better to use artificial intelligence because your descriptors are much more dynamic, and they show that you probably have a bit more opportunity for innovation. So a lot of people say that's cheating or plagiarizing, but honestly, if it helps you increase your vocabulary, or at least show that you can increase your vocabulary, and you can comply with that when you meet face to face within the company representatives, then I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a helpful point. There's a convenience
Hmm.
of these things, but we need to be checking them to make sure what we're actually
That's
the
right.
results are accurate and that we can back them up until we get
Hmm.
on the job. That's a great point. Thanks
Hmm.
for that.
Hmm.
So employer fit algorithm, let's kind of get back into that. Give us a
Yeah.
refresher on what that
Yeah.
is and how it fits into the topics we're talking about today.
You got it. So, employer fit algorithms are complex, obviously, but they're made up of a variety of key components associated with recruitment, hiring, and then ultimately retaining your staff. So, resume scanners, obviously the resume is a big component when it comes to the hiring process. So, you want to make sure that you have a weight or at least you have a percentage of how you're going to evaluate a person's competence and fit within your company by their resume. So you want to make sure that that's a part of it. Some companies have keystroke monitoring so that they can determine how fast the person can input information or data. Oftentimes there are job filters that are used by recruiters that's part of their algorithm where they filter out job applicants based on keywords and information that they may put on LinkedIn, for example, or some other social media site. There's software that evaluates candidates based on their facial expressions. Now, this was new to me, but I have seen it, videos of it, and speech patterns in video interviewing. So, this is more of an international experience from what I saw. I'm sure it's being done here in the US. I just didn't see an example of that. But from an international standpoint, yeah, they're looking at facial expressions and speech patterns as part of the interviewing process to make assumptions about your ability to be trustworthy and truthful. And then, of course, there's software that talks about job fit and culture, things like personalities, aptitudes, cognitive skills, your cultural fit within the actual organization, how that'll work. And a lot of those are based on things like performance, past performance, or quizzes, or some sort of a elaborate assessment that tries to evaluate that. So when it comes to an algorithm, I'll give it as succinct an answer as I can. It's the combination of these critical components that an employer believes helps them evaluate the efficacy or the viability of a candidate, and then you place a weight on those critical components to see, how this person stacks up in comparison to their competition.
And there really are components in that of DEI, of
Uh-huh.
artificial intelligence, of
That's right.
legislation, all of these
That's
things
right.
kind of it's a real complex uh,
Mm-hmm.
interaction there.
Mm-hmm. It's very complex, and you're right. There's so much that's downstream that affects this. And honestly, it should affect it. I mean, we've had the worst, in my opinion, we've had the worst or the most inefficient and ineffective hiring process forever, for as long as I've been doing this work, and it's been around 30 years. Just a resume and an interview doesn't necessarily guarantee you that you're going to get the best person. So expanding how you select an individual is really helpful. And obviously, I think people have heard of the price metrics that are associated with hiring the wrong person. It could cost you up to 150% of a person's salary to onboard them, to recruit, onboard, give them a desk and a computer and a phone. And then ultimately, it usually takes that person about 6 months to be efficient. um, it could take that long for an individual to be efficient. But if you lose them before the 6 month time period, then you've lost all the money that you've invested in them, and they haven't been able to give you any return. So I think it's important that we expand how these tools are used. We just have to be, I don't want to say cautious, but I think we just have to be strategic in how we do them, and how career professionals like us can consult with businesses and companies on the usage of these things, and the efficacy of these types of programs.
Absolutely. And how can we, as career development professionals, also convey to job seekers,
Yep,
you what's happening in this complex process?
you got it. And what it's used for, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I can trick this particular employer fit tool." No, no, really, you can't. And really, the point is to not trick it. I think you and I both know that one of the big components of any type of vocational self-concept development is self-awareness. You have to know yourself, and you want to be able to express who you are, because companies want to know who they're getting, and you want to know what kind of company you're going into. So I think being able to be honest and authentic to both of those elements helps you make a better selection as an individual. And of course, it might help the company make a better selection overall too of the applicant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, with these tools, what do employers need to understand related to
Mm.
going back to legislation to EEOC guidelines
Mhm.
as of April 2023?
Yeah. So there are four clear guidelines that are established. One is the selection procedure, because this is how EEOC will evaluate. So employers must, and I'm just going to read from the EEOC guidelines, so it's going to sound legalistic. So forgive me for that. But employers must ensure that their selection procedures, when using algorithmic decision-making tools, do not result in a disparate or adverse impact under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And so being able to prove that what you're doing in terms of implementing an employer fit algorithm process, you have to be able to demonstrate that it's not causing undue harm to the protected classes under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 64. So in order to do that, you have to be able to comply with what's called the 4/5 rule. So, under the 4/5 rule, adverse impact is generally indicated where a quote selection rate end quote for any protected characteristic is less than 80% or 4/5 of the rate of the group with the highest selection rate. And so, Melissa, I don't know if you can do this, but I have a slide that shows this, that shows how it works. I think describing it is nice, but I think showing it is much more helpful. But I'll do my best to describe it, and then if folks want to look at this particular slide when they're doing the podcast, we can do that. But let's say, for example, you have four categories of applicants. You have a group of individuals who classify themselves as white, a group that classifies themselves as Black, a group that classifies themselves as Hispanic, and a group that classifies themselves as Native American. So amongst the group that classified themselves as white, there were 80 total applicants. So 48 of those 80 were hired. All right. And so 48 divided by 80 is 60%. And so that 60%, that's the group with the highest selection rate in this particular example. If we hired 20 of the 40 applicants who classified themselves as Black, that's a 50% rate. And so what you do is you take the rate percentage and you divide it by the highest percent hired rate percentage. So in this case, it would be 50 divided by 60, and that equals 83%. So in the 4/5 rule, that passes. That particular classification, that group, or that hiring percentage passes. And let's say that for the group of individuals who classify themselves as Hispanic, we hired 10. Well, 10 divided by 30 is 33%. 33 divided by 60 equals 55%. So for that population, the algorithm it could have led to this particular impact or disparate impact for that group. And then, of course, for the Native Americans, we had 20 applicants and 10 were hired. Again, that's a 50%. So you end up with an 83%. And that's what this example shows. So that's how you evaluate. Now, the hard part about this is, again, the metrics are somewhat challenging, but you want to be able to, as a business, you want to be able to automate and protect yourself against this particular outcome. So I think, the biggest thing is understanding how these algorithms work so that you can design them prior to using them in a way that will minimize or restrict this particular outcome. That's going to be the hardest part for most companies.
Gotcha. That's super helpful. And listeners
Mm-hmm.
can check the show notes for a link to that graphic, which I think will be really helpful as well.
Okay.
So are there other things that would make a strong employer fit tool that would help employers kind of avoid the sanctions with this new EEOC guideline?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just going to finish up the other two categories according to EEOC. Then I'll jump right into where you are. So, the EEOC doesn't allow you to say that, well, a third party did this or a vendor is the one that's doing this work. So therefore, we're not responsible for disparate impact. No, you're not able to be shielded in that way as a company. If it's something that you bought or, you have a vendor giving you insight or consultation on, then it's yours. You own the outcome as well as the process. So as a business, you want to make sure that you're involved heavily in knowing what algorithm and how that algorithm is working for you. And then the last thing is that you need to be able to have options to address disparate impact. So again, I'm going to read from EEOC. So in the event that an employer discovers that its algorithmic decision-making tool does result in disparate impact, the EEOC suggests that the employer can either discontinue the use of the tool or select an alternative tool that does not have a disparate impact, or modify or redesign the tool using comparatively effective alternative algorithms during the developmental stage. So, you get a chance to correct the problem. EEOC is not just going to come in with a hammer and say you do fail and that's it. You're going to be sanctioned. No, you do get a chance. This is an emerging technology. This is an emerging science, and so it's not always going to work the way that you envisioned or idealistically expect it to work. So you are given an opportunity to do that. So, so in terms of just looking forward, Melissa, I think, the good thing is that more and more employers are beginning to use these particular tools, mainly because they're reducing human resource staff. It's obviously more costly to have staff. And doing these types of metrics are so automated today that it's just easier to go with this particular approach. So if you're offering software, or there's software offered in this particular area, the things that you need to be aware of are making sure that the tool meets the certain criteria. Now, you said that I've done research in this area. Yep, I have a patent. I have my own employer fit algorithm that's been patented. So here's some things about the employer fit algorithm, and I call it a quality match index. So that's just a title for the algorithmic tool that we use. So the software is cloud based, and so therefore it's not trapped in some local database, and that makes it a little bit more flexible. It's based on a set of comprehensive survey questions that are directed to compare individual traits with predetermined set of survey data from the company that reflects their culture. So basically, you get a baseline score for the company. So in essence, what we do is we take 20 people within the company, and we evaluate them using this survey. And then we take their individual scores and put them on a normative scale. So we combine them, and we use some fancy mathematics, and based on that, we put them on a scale. So basically, you get a fingerprint or an identifier for your company culture, because the 20 people that are selected within the company are diverse. They're a variety of folks. Some have long-term tenure, others may not, but some may be more innovative. Some may be more in alignment with where the company wants to go versus where they've been. So, there's a 10-year difference there. So, and that's what we recommend. So with that, if you can put together a cultural fingerprint of the company when you're recruiting, part of the algorithm that we suggest is that in your recruitment process, which includes resumes, interviewing, and all the things that you may want to utilize, part of it is doing a measure to have these individuals do a survey. Individuals do the survey, and then based on those traits, how do those traits align with what the baseline of the culture is? And so that's what that index measures. And basically, and from that, you get a score. And it just tells you whether the person is an optimal fit, a good fit, a fair fit, or a poor fit with that particular culture normative scale. We found that it's been very effective. Companies use it as part of the process. It doesn't determine who gets hired, but it certainly is effective in helping them understand if they are going to bring an individual on because they believe this individual is the right person, then they have an idea from a trait perspective how that individual might operate and function, and how that might evolve the culture in a way that's more positive. So you also want to make sure that if you have an employer fit algorithmic tool that's measuring culture, that you keep it anonymous. You want to have numbers assigned to this individual that's doing it, not names, because obviously name biases play a big role. They do for resumes, and you can't really avoid that for a resume to a large extent, but you can avoid it for this particular assessment so that you're not unduly biased when it comes to their data. The results can be used to analyze and pinpoint team conflicts, which is sometimes important to know potential team conflicts before the person comes in, as well as just score the predictability of how this person might fit in and evolve with the existing culture. It doesn't. The software that I've patented does not use simulation-based analysis, which fails to account for decision-making bias. Oftentimes, you put people in simulations, and then you think, okay, based on the simulation, this is how they're going to act within the workspace. That's not necessarily true. That hasn't been proven to be a predictable factor. Also, the QMI software is not based on a time quotient, A lot of times people say, okay, there's a time element associated with this. And so therefore that time component shows your ability to be conscientious or less conscientious, however that measure is being accounted for. But there is no time quotient for this. The individual has as much time as they need. The software evaluates traits, not characteristics. And so I'm going to define a trait here. A trait is a personality characteristic that meets three criteria. It must be consistent, it must be stable, and it must vary from person to person. It can't be the same. Like if you're a nice person, lots of people are nice people, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily should be a good fit within your company. And then last, the QMI uses the big five traits, which have a psychometric coefficient of about 8.88, which is very high, in this world in terms of predictability standards. So with knowing those elements and being able to incorporate them into your algorithmic process, you're better able to avoid a lot of the EEOC cautions and guidelines. But more importantly, you're going to be able to select and pick a candidate who really does fit more with your company, and therefore they're not just going to be hired and brought on. They're actually going to be valued and appreciated and ultimately retained. That's the employer fit component.
That is fascinating. There's a lot of
There's a lot
there's a
to
lot
that.
to it, right? So
Mhm.
I feel like it's not for beginners, but for people that want to dive in, there's a lot of information likely out there to kind of get started and get the skills that you need to really work with these tools.
Yes, you're right. It's hard to put a fence around, and that's part. I'm working on that work now, because now that I have a tool and I have something that's available and it's out there in the market, and people are using it. Yeah, now you got to kind of help people understand the best ways to use it, and putting a fence around it is not easy, as you said. So if you're going to get into this work, that's going to be helpful for you to be able to know where it all fits.
Excellent. Are there specific resources or places where people could find more information if they want to get started with this?
Yeah, I have a reference list that I'll send out, that I'll include with this particular podcast that I think might be helpful. The problem is that so much of this work is proprietary, and so it's really hard to get people to open up and talk about the inner workings of their program and their process. I mean, what I revealed to you is you probably have to sign an NDA if
Right. Right.
if you're working with me on that. But I think it's for the betterment of our constituents that they understand the complexity, but also understand that it's not undoable. And many employers are taking this stuff on. And if we don't learn to adapt and take on this particular, what do you want to call it, segment of career development, then we're missing out. We're not going to be able to give our customers the right information, nor are we going to be able to satisfy the needs of the employer. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, innovation is happening everywhere, so we've got to stay up to
Hmm.
date, right, with the trends and the tools.
Yeah, we do. We do. And again, that's not an easy thing to do. But once you're doing it, it I found it to be a fascinating area of study. And I get lots of folks in the consultation process who, once they get what you and I just described, they really want to do much, much more. And I oftentimes have to hold them back and say, no, 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 because there's a reason why we structured the algorithmic process this way. And so you want to stay with that until you know more about how it's impacting your hiring and recruitment process.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Informed,
Mhm.
purposeful
Yes.
improvement. Absolutely.
Yes, yes, slow and steady. We're not into instant gratification. We're here for the long haul. So, all right,
Is there anything
okay.
else you want to do before I do the wrap up?
No, but I do want to say that it's really helpful, that we have programs like yours and just in institutions like NCDA, because being able to get this information into the hands of the public, without them having to pay for it or use some sort of dramatic effort, I think is very, very important. And so I'm hoping that not only me, but others take this on and do more with it and just contribute to this study of work because it's really valuable and it's helping people overall.
Oh gosh, that's great, Brett.
Okay.
Thanks so much for that shout out to
Hmm.
NCDA. And we'll add lots of
Yeah,
resources in the show notes. So listeners, go ahead and take a look at that online for more details.
you got it.
Thanks so
You
much
got it.
for being here, Brett, and sharing your time and expertise in this area with our audience.
Thank you, Melissa.